Hi, Mackenzie. Step out for me. I'm Detective Jesus. I'm the one who's been investigating the crash. You're under arrest for aggravated murder ×2, okay? Nobody's gonna ask you any questions. Nobody's gonna bother you. Can I have your key, please?
Could you please be careful taking this one off so it doesn't break the bracelet, please?
You got it. You got it.
At 5:34 in the morning, a 2018 Toyota Camry hit a brick wall at exactly 100 miles per hour. There were no skid marks on the pavement. There was no evidence of a mechanical failure, no sudden tire blowout, and no external obstruction. To the local first responders who arrived at the industrial park in Strongsville, Ohio, it looked like a standard, albeit devastating, high-speed collision caused by a teenager losing control in the pre-dawn darkness. However, inside the car's dashboard was a small silver box that told a different story. It recorded a sequence of 100% throttle, 0% braking, and a calculated decision to kill. This is the anatomy of a collision where the machine became the only reliable witness. To understand why this was not an accident, you have to stand on Progress Drive. It is an industrial cul-de-sac designed for logistics and heavy shipping, not for through traffic or spectators. It is an obscure route, a straight runway terminating in the fixed brick facade of the Plidco building. On July 31, 2022, this specific geometry served a lethal purpose. There was no cross-traffic to interrupt acceleration and no curve sharp enough to force a driver to slow down. Look down at the asphalt where the car began its final sprint. In a fatal high-speed crash, the pavement usually bears the braking signature of a driver trying to survive. When a human being senses an impending impact, the nervous system triggers a reflexive stomp on the brake pedal. This creates friction, heat, and distinct black streaks of rubber known as yaw marks or skid marks. Here, the road is clean. The silence of the asphalt is a statistical outlier, suggesting that the driver never fought back against the momentum. The driver was 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla. In the seats beside and behind her were 20-year-old Dominic Russo and 19-year-old Davion Flanagan. In the months following the crash, the public narrative focused on a grieving survivor and a tragic mistake made by a young girl. However, forensic investigators moved away from the human narrative and toward the mechanical one. They turned their attention to the event data recorder, a component often called the automotive black box. Every modern vehicle carries this digital witness, usually tucked beneath the center console or integrated into the airbag control module. It does not record audio or video of the passengers, but it samples a rolling window of performance data every few milliseconds. It tracks engine RPM, steering angle, seatbelt status, and most importantly, the exact position of the accelerator and brake pedals. The mechanism of an event data recorder is designed to capture the truth of a collision. It is constantly overwriting its memory until a trigger event occurs, usually an impact significant enough to deploy the airbags or tighten the seatbelts. When the Camry hit the brick wall, the computer triggered a freeze frame event. It permanently locked the final 4.6 seconds of the drive into its non-volatile memory, creating a digital snapshot that cannot be altered or erased by the driver. When investigators extracted this data, they found a record of absolute intent. The telemetry showed that the accelerator pedal was depressed to its maximum capacity, 100%, and held there without a single millisecond of interruption until the moment of impact. During that same window, the brake status remained at 0. There was no attempt to swerve, no attempt to slow down, and no mechanical failure of the braking system. The car did exactly what the driver commanded it to do. It converted fuel into maximum kinetic energy and directed that energy into a fixed object. To understand the scale of this speed, one must consider the physics of the industrial park. A car traveling 100 miles per hour covers 147 feet every single second. At this velocity, the 4.6 seconds recorded by the box represents the length of 2 football fields. For that entire distance, the driver had every opportunity to lift her foot. She had every opportunity to move her right foot just a few inches to the left and engage the brakes. The data proves she did neither. Instead, she maintained a full throttle posture, forcing the engine to its absolute limit as the brick wall loomed closer. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a sustained physical commitment to a lethal trajectory. The telemetry revealed a second, more chaotic layer of the struggle inside the cabin during those final seconds. In the moments before the car jumped the curb and struck the building, the steering wheel underwent a violent 142-degree turn, and the gear shift was moved between drive and neutral. Prosecutors argued that this was the digital footprint of a fight for survival. It suggested that Dominic Russo or Davion Flanagan may H. Ave realized the car was not stopping and attempted to seize the wheel or kill the power to the engine. The machine logged this desperation in the form of steering torque and gear changes, all while the driver's foot remained heavy on the throttle. The car was traveling so fast that by the time the occupants realized the intent, the physics of the situation were already irreversible. The transition from a moving vehicle to a heap of scrap metal happened in less than a tenth of a second. This technical evidence eventually collided with what investigators call behavioral metadata. While the driver claimed in the hospital to have no memory of the crash and speculated about a medical emergency or a loss of consciousness, her digital footprint suggested a very different state of mind. Investigators recovered text messages and social media data that documented a volatile, strained relationship between Shirilla and Russo. The prosecution presented evidence of a pattern of behavior that was consistent with a person who used her vehicle as a tool of intimidation. The court heard of previous incidents where Shirilla had allegedly threatened to crash the car while Russo was inside. Social media videos posted after the deaths, showing the driver appearing unbothered at a Halloween party months later, further alienated the court. These were not the actions of someone who had suffered an inexplicable accident, but the actions of someone who felt a sense of control over the outcome. The case proceeded to a bench trial, where the evidence was weighed not by a jury but by a single judge. This format allowed for a more clinical, data-heavy presentation of the facts. In August 2023, the court noted the specific choice of an isolated location, a business park that was nearly abandoned at 5 in the morning. This choice meant there would be no witnesses to intervene and no other cars to strike before reaching the wall. The judge labeled the driver "hell on wheels," a phrase that captured the transformation of a passenger car into a guided projectile. The ruling was a landmark in how digital evidence is used to prove murder in the modern age. Under Ohio law, premeditation does not require a week of planning or a written manifesto. It only requires the conscious decision not to stop in those final, critical seconds. When the driver had the opportunity to lift her foot or press the brake, she chose to maintain the throttle. The legal distinction between reckless homicide and murder often comes down to the concept of purposeful intent. Recklessness implies a failure to perceive a risk, such as driving too fast on a curved road. Murder implies a purposeful desire to cause a specific result. By showing that the throttle was pinned at 100% for the entire duration of the approach, the prosecution successfully argued that the result, the death of the passengers, was the intended goal of the driver's actions. The judge agreed, noting that the driver's actions were not those of someone who lost control, but of someone who exercised total control over a lethal weapon. The brick building on Progress Drive has been repaired, but the discolored masonry remains a permanent marker of where kinetic energy met intent. Mackenzie Shirilla was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years, a sentence that reflected the court's view that the crash was a purposeful execution. We now live in an era where our cars, phones, and wearable devices function as involuntary witnesses to our darkest moments. They log our inertia, our positions, and our choices with a precision that human memory cannot match. They are immune to persuasion, and they do not feel the influence of grief or social pressure. They simply record the physics of our actions. In the case of the Strongsville collision, the silence of the asphalt was loud enough to move a tragedy into the category of murder. It proved that in the modern world, the most reliable testimony doesn't come from the people involved, but from the machines they operate. While a human being can choose to forget the final 5 seconds of a crime, the data remains locked in the circuitry, long after the engine stops and the dust settles on the road. The machine saw the throttle open, it felt the absence of the brake, and it recorded a choice that no amount of testimony can ever undo.